If you feel like certain things are no coincidence, maybe this video is what you needed to hear. There is something in us that seems not to belong entirely to Earth. A silent fragment who looks at the sky and feels, with a longing that he cannot name, that it came from somewhere place long before its time. Since the beginning of our history, human beings have sought to understand who wove it, what force shaped him, what breath made him conscious, what invisible code sustains its existence. We call this code DNA. 3 letters that house an entire universe of information, a perfect double spiral, where each fold seems to carry the signature of something that transcends chance. It's as if life was written by hand, with patience cosmic, cell by cell, until awakening the eyes that now observe infinity. But a question echoes, as old as light itself. Did we evolve only by force of nature, or were we touched by something bigger? Because inside us there is an enigma. Our DNA is 99.9% identical among all humans, but only a small fraction different enough to generate consciousness, art, love, faith, and no one, to this day, has been able to explain why this spark of self-awareness came on suddenly, as if it had been ignited. Ancient civilizations seem to know this. They spoke of gods who came down from the sky, and they taught man to cultivate, to dream, to understand fire and the stars. The Sumerians, they called these beings Anunnaki. The Egyptians, from Netjeru. The Mayans, from children of the sun. In each language, a veiled memory, the idea that something, or someone, participated of the construction of who we are. Perhaps this is why science and spirituality have never stopped observing each other, mutually suspicious and fascinated. While geneticists look for mutations and fossils, mystics speak of higher planes, architects of light and stellar engineers. 2 looks at the same mystery, the origin of life, and when we look inside, something in us recognizes this mystery as a longing, because there are moments when the simple beating of the heart seems to echo an old song, a code that the mind cannot decipher, but the soul understands. So what are we really? A biological miracle shaped by evolution, or a carefully guided cosmic experience? Whatever the answer, it is hidden in every cell, in every fragment of this sacred spiral that connects us to stardust. If something inside you is awakening, stay until the end. The answer may be here, between the invisible of science and the silence of the stars. The human body is an invisible temple. On the outside, flesh and bone. Inside, trillions of cells vibrating in perfect harmony, as if obeying a score that no earthly orchestra could compose it. This score is DNA, the microscopic tape which contains the manual of everything we are, and could be. Inside it is written the roadmap of life, and perhaps the echo of whoever wrote it. Science describes DNA as a molecule made up of 4 letters. A, T, C, and G, just 4 symbols repeated in almost infinite combinations, form the code that it creates eyes, hearts, mountains of thought, and oceans of emotion. A language binary of the flesh. The question is, who taught the subject how to write? Chance, some say. Evolution, say others. Mutation after mutation, during billions of years, until life found itself. But there is a point on the way that challenges even the most skeptical of biologists. The origin of the code. No purely natural process until now has been able to explain how the first DNA molecules formed in such an orderly and functional way. The mathematical chance that a self-replicating sequence arises by accident is so tiny that, according to some scientists, borders on the impossible. It's as if a storm of letters fell on the sand and, when the wind stopped, a poem was written there. Francis Crick, the co-discoverer of the structure of DNA, even suggested that perhaps life was seeded from outside, through a process he called panspermia-directed. According to this hypothesis, advanced civilizations could have disseminated the base of life across the cosmos, like stellar gardeners seeding worlds. A bold idea, but which echoes ancient spiritual narratives about beings coming from heaven to plant the consciousness on earth. Even without resorting to the extraordinary, DNA remains a mystery to thought rational. It is simultaneously physical and symbolic, a material ribbon that behaves like a text. Each gene is an instruction, a sentence within a book that contains more than 3 billion words. And, interestingly, This book is written with the same universal logic that governs spirals of galaxies and seashells. The golden ratio, the rhythm of the cosmos, also seems pulsate in the turns of the molecule that defines us. For some physicists and bioinformationists, DNA is not just biology. It is information encoded, and information presupposes intention. If there is code, there is language. And if there is language, there is an author. Perhaps this author is the consciousness of the universe itself, manifesting through equations and frequencies. Or perhaps they are intelligences that, long before us, they learned to manipulate the fabric of creation. Still, the miracle remains silent. Inside each cell, DNA copies itself with almost divine precision, correcting your own mistakes, adapting, evolving, reinventing itself with each generation. And all this happens without you having to order, pray, or understand. Life knows what to do. This is why some mystics claim that DNA is the bridge between the body and the spirit, one mirror where the cosmos recognizes itself. When we look at a molecule, we are, without realize, looking at a piece of eternity that has learned to multiply. But if this code is so perfect, why does it fail at certain times? Why is there genetic diseases, mutations, replication errors? Maybe because the universe too learned from your own imperfections. After all, every creation carries with it the risk of the unforeseen, and it is in this interval between the order and the chaos that gives rise to consciousness. DNA, in the end, is the altar where science and mystery touch, a molecular poem that whispers, "You are not just made of carbon, but of memory stellar." And so the enigma begins to pulsate. If life carries a code, who was the first to write it? There is a symmetry in creation that does not seem to accept chance. The same design that lives. The DNA spiral appears in galaxies, in the eddies of the ocean, and in the seeds of the sunflower. It is the secret language of the universe, repeating itself tirelessly, as if tried to remind us that everything is part of the same thought. The code you write a star is the same as what you write. The ancients already perceived this harmony long before science gave it a name. They called it sacred geometry, the invisible mathematics of God. For them, the body human was a reflection of the cosmos, the micro and the macro dancing in unison. Today, when a microscope looks at DNA, what it finds is a double spiral that looks echo the Milky Way itself. Two intertwined lines that approach, move away, they ring, as if love had found a molecular form. It's curious to think that, among all the possibilities, life chose this form, a ribbon that turns on itself, as if it contained movement and eternity. Science calls it has a helical structure. The mystics, of ascension spiral, the same symbol as the Egyptians drew in temples, which the Mayans hid in their sculptures, which the Hindus saw in the coiled serpent of Kundalini, rising up the spine like a chain of energy. Coincidence? Or a memory of universal wisdom about the origin of life? In recent years, researchers have discovered something even more intriguing. DNA is not just a static file. It vibrates, emits frequencies, reacts to light and sound. When subjected to certain waves, its behavior changes, as if responding to a forgotten language. Some Russian scientists, such as Peter Garyaev, suggest that the DNA works like a biological antenna, capable of storing and transmitting information through subtle fields. It's as if inside each cell there was a small station cosmic, capturing instructions from a greater intelligence. The metaphor is powerful. If DNA is an antenna, the human body is the instrument and the consciousness music. Every thought, every emotion, every prayer alters the melody that we touch the universe. Perhaps this is why spiritual traditions have always associated the body to vibration and light. The verb made flesh can be, in essence, the code that became biology. But there's something even more mysterious. Within our DNA, only about 2% is responsible for coding proteins, that is, for determining the physical shape of the body. The remainder, almost 98%, was called until recently junk DNA, because science, I didn't know what it was for. Today, this term has fallen into disuse. Researchers discovered that this immense portion contains regulators, repetitive patterns, and sequences that they seem to function like information switches, turning potentials on and off. Some call this uncharted territory the sacred zone of the genome. What if this hidden space is precisely what connects our biology to consciousness? What if is there the portal between the human and the divine? Mystics would say that this dormant DNA is the spiritual portion that has not yet we learned to decode, that when a being awakens, meditates or loves deeply, activates silent parts of this code, becoming a bridge between worlds. The science calls this epigenetics, the ability of our emotions and environments to activate or turn off genes. Spirituality calls it inner alchemy. Perhaps deep down they are talking about the same thing, the possibility of rewriting one's own destiny through the vibration of love and consciousness. And so the mystery expands. Why the more man investigates DNA, the more he realizes that within himself there is something that reflects the cosmos, and perhaps the Creator himself. What if biology is just the mirror where God contemplates his own face? In almost all ancient cultures, there is the same plot told under different names. Luminous beings descended from the sky and taught man how to build cities, measure time, and understand the fire of life. The Sumerians called them Anunnaki. The Egyptians, from Necheru. The Mayans spoke of the children of the sun, and the Hopi Indians of the Kachinas, messengers from the stars. It is curious to realize that civilizations separated by oceans and centuries narrate the same myth, that humanity received help from intelligences coming from beyond the firmament. In clay tablets found in ancient Mesopotamia, the Sumerians report that the Anunnaki came down from heaven to shape humanity. They say they mixed the blood of the gods with the clay of the earth, creating a being capable of working, thinking, and evolving. For many scholars it is just allegory, but for others, among them the linguist Zecharia Sitchin, this narrative describes, in ancient language, an act of engineering genetics. Clay would be Earth's biological material, the blood, the star code inserted into the primitive man. The idea seems fantastic, but it provokes reflection. If human DNA contains 3 billion of base pairs, how many possibilities for intervention does it allow? A simple, changing one gene can change the course of an entire species. On a cosmic scale, perhaps may be the result of an experiment much older than we imagine, a project led by consciences that understood the code of life as a universal language. Archaeological evidence fuels this debate. On the walls of Egyptian temples, winged figures hold objects that resemble capsules and tubes. In Peru, the gods Viracocha and Manco Capac descend from the heavens to teach agriculture and writing. In India, the Vedas describe beings who travel in light machines called vimanas. In Mexico, the god Quetzalcoatl is described as a master from heaven, bearer of wisdom and technology. Different lands, the same symbol, knowledge descending from the stars. Modern science calls this cultural coincidence. But will it really just be coincidence? Or an echo of collective memory, preserved in the language of myth? Carl Jung said that archetypes are inherited memories, universal images recorded in the human unconscious. Perhaps these gods are not literal figures, but representations of something real, an ancestral encounter with beings whose presence was translated in the language that man at the time could understand, that of the gods and light. Some comparative genetics researchers have found that about 223 genes present in the human genome do not appear in any other known organism. They are isolated segments, without clear precursors in evolution. This raises a question that echoes between the lines of science. How did these mysterious additions come about? Are just natural mutations or marks of intentional intervention? Francis Crick, one of the fathers of DNA, suggested that life could have been similarly sown. He used the expression directed panspermia, imagining civilizations capable of sending microorganisms into space to propagate life. What was a philosophical hypothesis for it has today become a real field of research in astrobiology. What if these cosmic gardeners not only sowed the seed of life, but shaped your growth? What if human evolution was observed, corrected, and guided as an experiment that needed to reach consciousness? Of course, mainstream science rejects any extraterrestrial hypothesis, but deny the question does not eliminate the mystery. Because even within classical biology, something remains inexplicable: the sudden leap of consciousness. In just a few tens of thousands of years, we went from collectors to creators of symphonies, spaceships, and quantum theories. No other animal has demonstrated such an abrupt advance. Ancient texts describe this moment as an act of enlightenment, the instant when that man received the breath of the gods and began to recognize himself. Maybe the DNA has been the lamp, conscience, the flame. You don't have to believe in winged beings to feel the depth of this symbol. He speaks of origin, of purpose, and of a type of cosmic love that creates to recognize itself in creation. If we have been, in some way, touched by stellar intelligences, it was not just to survive, it was to awaken. And perhaps true contact is not in the sky, but in every cell that vibrates within us, carrying the memory of a star who one day dreamed of becoming human. What if man is the way the universe learned to remember itself? Science is the mirror where mystery tries to see itself without metaphor. And yet, even with all her rigor, she is faced with questions that seem to whisper from a place in addition to laboratories. The origin of the human being remains one of them. The theory of evolution explains the transformation of species through natural selection. Every useful mutation is preserved, every error corrected over millions of years. It's an elegant, coherent, and proven mechanism in countless examples. But there is a point that still causes astonishment: the speed of human jumping. For nearly 4 million years, our ancestors lived with tools, rudimentary instincts, basic instincts, and limited consciousness. Suddenly, in less than 50,000 years, a blink of an eye on a geological scale, art, language symbolic, spirituality, and the ability to plan the future, the human brain has tripled in size. The larynx descended, allowing speech to emerge articulated. The social structure became more complex, and empathy began to shape morality. Something happened, and no one knows exactly what. Scientists call this phenomenon a cognitive leap, but a name is not an explanation. Where did this spark that transformed instinct into imagination come from? How the genetic code, now so meticulous and stable, could in such a short time reconfigure itself to point of generating poetry and existential awareness. Some geneticists believe this jump is related to targeted mutations by environmental factors. Others suggest an even more mysterious cause. DNA itself can be sensitive to electromagnetic fields and subtle energies, reacting to stimuli invisible. Modern neuroscience is beginning to admit that consciousness is not just a product brain chemical, but perhaps an immaterial field interacting with it. In other words, the body does not create consciousness. It only translates it. When we look at the DNA molecule, we see a strand twisted into a helix. When we look at the Milky Way, we see the same movement. The microstructure of life imitates the drawing of galaxies. This proves nothing, but it suggests a signature. Nature does not repeat by chance. Quantum physics also entered this dialogue. It shows that subatomic particles behave consciously, responding to the observer, changing the outcome of experiments simply because someone is looking. And if conscience is the curtain depth of existence, the invisible force that makes DNA vibrate toward complexity, in a way, science itself is moving closer to a spiritual vision even without want. The study of epigenetics, for example, shows that thoughts and emotions can activate or silence genes. What we feel changes the expression of our genetic code. This means that consciousness, or what we call spirit, has the power to shape biology. It's as if life were programmed to respond to love, to intention, and attention. Perhaps this is why so many researchers claim that DNA is more than a molecule. It is a communication system. Every cell in the body knows what the others do. A heart at peace sends messages, chemicals of harmony that reach the brain. Stress, on the other hand, distorts this communication and changes genetic reading. Science calls this cardiac coherence. The ancients called it silent prayer. What we learn then is that mystery need not contradict reason. He just exceeds. Evolution may have been the stage, but perhaps consciousness was the invisible scriptwriter. Biology shows the path that bodies have taken. The soul perhaps has chosen the destination. Between test tubes and telescopes, modern science begins to recognize what that mystics have always known. The human being is the meeting point between the atom and the infinite. What if reason itself is a tool created so that the mystery could unfold? Understand? Inside each of us there is a silent archive, a library made of light and dust. DNA doesn't just store biological instructions. He retains memories. Load the traces of the first waters, the fire of the stars that gave birth to us, and the echo of the voices that one day they whispered our name in another language, perhaps out of this world. When you breathes, the whole universe breathes together, because what makes it up is the same thing that builds the cosmos. Science calls this genetic continuity. Spirituality calls it the lineage of soul. We are an uninterrupted sequence of existences, a chain that crosses the time, carrying experiences, pain, wisdom. Genes are transmitted, but something more seems to travel with them. Perhaps the conscience, perhaps the sacred memory of those who we went before oblivion. Ancient people believed that blood was the vehicle of the spirit. Today we know that the blood is also the carrier of life, the fluid that carries the code that defines us. When a heart beats, it is not just delivering oxygen, it is propagating an ancient history, the narrative of a universe that decided to know itself through us. What science calls epigenetics, the influence of emotions and the environment on activation of S genes, is, in essence, what the mystics called transmutation. One thought can alter the body. Trauma can be inherited. A gesture of love can heal generations. Perhaps this is what the ancients meant when they talked about purifying the lineage, cleaning not only the blood, but the spiritual information that lives in it. With each generation, we inherit more than physical traits. We inherit patterns, beliefs, fears. We inherit the hope of those who came before. But within this heritage there is also something indestructible, the spark, this particle invisible who, even after 1,000 mistakes, insists on remembering perfection. She is the one who wakes up when we look at the sky and feel that there is more. It is what lights up when we forgive, when we love, when we pray. It is the DNA of the soul. What if we could awaken the full potential of this code? Some researchers, spiritualists, claim that DNA is multidimensional, that only 2 of the 12 helices are physically active, while the others vibrate on subtle planes, awaiting the call of conscience. Truth or metaphor, the idea touches on something profound, the notion that we are just beginning to understand what we are. Spiritual awakening would then be the act of remembering, not to learn something new, but to reactivate dormant information within us. When we meditate, pray, or we connect to love, maybe we are just turning the key that opens these helices hidden, allowing human beings to once again talk to the cosmos that gave rise to them. In the end, DNA is our invisible inheritance, a biological mirror where God wrote his own reflection and gave us our power to read it, letter by letter, with an awakened heart. What if understanding DNA is deep down, learning to decipher the language of the soul? Perhaps humanity's greatest secret is not in the stars, but within what the stars left in us. Because DNA deep down is not just a biological code. It is a spiritual mirror, an encrypted message that says, "You are the continuity of the universe who breathes in human form." And that is why the search for our origin does not end with telescopes or laboratories. It ends in the heart. The moment we realize that the same fire that lights up the sun vibrates in our cells, that the same intelligence that organizes the galaxies also order the growth of a child, the flowering of a soul, the silence of a prayer. Modern man looks at the sky and asks, where did we come from? But perhaps the correct question is, where are we going back to? Because everything that evolves seems in some way to return to the source. The DNA spiral is not just, the image of progress. It is the symbol of eternal return, of the memory that curves in on itself to recognize itself. If there was a genetic project conducted by stellar intelligences, it was not just scientific, it was spiritual. The intention perhaps was not to create a species, but to awaken a consciousness capable of loving. Maybe we are living proof that the universe wanted to feel compassion through matter, that God, or the name each culture gave him, desired experience your own, reflection in the form of humanity. Therefore, the true evolutionary leap is not in the mutations of the body, but in the expansion of the heart. Every act of empathy, every gesture of forgiveness, every silent prayer is a mutation spiritual, a new reading of the original code. Love is the continuous editing of the DNA of soul. Science seeks to understand the causes. Spirituality seeks to recognize meaning, but at the point where both meet, something greater emerges. The awareness that the human and the divine were never separated. We were made of the same fabric that sews constellations. We are fragments of eternity and learning. Therefore, when you feel that there is something in you that does not entirely belong to Earth, don't run away. Perhaps it is the call of your own origin, asking you to remember who you are. If this message touched something for you, subscribe and follow us. Your soul may be remembering the path, and at the end of it all, only the mystery remains. Question that echoes between galaxies and cells, between the atom and the heart. What if what we call the end is just the beginning of a memory that the soul has not yet forgot? What if the universe wasn't trying to explain the origin of life to us, but just remember who we are when we hear the sound of silence again?